I'm Aron Budea, and the topic of my talk will be interoperability testing and some results there. So, interoperability is something that we're challenged with every day, and even though we're testing the software regularly, it's something that doesn't really fit into the normal testing process because we have to involve a lot of software, and which is usually Microsoft Office, because interoperability itself is passing documents and opening and editing documents in various different software. And what this means is that because of the inconvenient nature of testing, and also that file formats are very complex, like they're described in thousands pages long documents, which means that it's very hard to cover all the details in the various formats, and also that a single change can have a big impact and can go undetected for a long time, in the sense that you're working on your document in Collaborate Online, for example, for a while, and then you want to open it later in Office, and it doesn't look the same, or I cannot open it. And that's definitely a problem. And while we're trying to improve the situation, in the sense that when we're fixing bugs, we're trying to add unit tests for them, and that ensures that that particular bug or particular feature remains stable. But those unit tests they only involve LibreOffice or Collaborate Online. It doesn't involve the other software in this case, and they can only test what is programmed there. But they are run before merging any changes, and thus keep at least those features stable. So we have two goals when we're trying to identify and finding and handling these issues. One is to avoid regressions, and that's something that we need to do before every release and every update, because regressions are generally bursts, because what used to work does not work anymore, and that causes more problems for people who expect them to be working as they used to. This could also come from implemented features. They're not necessarily regressions, but they still mean that a new bug appeared in the software that was not there before. And the other set of issues are the ones that have been there for a long time, maybe even from the beginning. Maybe they could be like related to missing features as well. And in this case, we do want to identify them, but it's a more relaxed timeline and see when and how these can be handled. So the basic idea is, what if we could take a large set of files and we could run them to Collaborate Online process, open, save it back, and then open it in Microsoft Office and see if this file still opened cleanly and if they show the same fidelity as the original document. In my case, I'm only looking at whether the document opened cleanly. Justin Luth's project is that he's trying to identify issues with document fidelity. And we're trying to automate this using the convert to endpoint using Collaborate Online and COM interface for Microsoft Office. The test files are from public backtrackers and forums, and the numbers are like there are some 50 to 60,000 documents, there are more than 180,000 spreadsheets, 8,000 presentations. There are scripts for this in the core LibreOffice repository to retrieve them from the various forums and Baxilas. what's good to know about these files is that they have mixed quality and mixed correctness. So it could be already buggy files that people uploaded to the Bugzilla as a non-working example. So and they could also come from LibreOffice, Microsoft Office, or some other third-party doc generators. So it's just because something is failing, it doesn't mean there's a bug. It might have been that the file was problematic in the first place. And they're also not representative, because this can be whatever the topic of certain forums were, or what people were interested in when they filed their bugs. But since they're very varied, they are good. They're still good to be able to identify issues and see if something comes up. We created a tool. It's named MSO Test. This was created by Pranam Lashkari, and later Nel Gurtin also worked on this. It's written in C#. It's available in that location, and the results are also published on that URL. The process for this tool is that the test files are collected in directories. This tool loops through them per application. First they open the original file in Microsoft Office through the COM interface and just see whether it can open the original file, because if it cannot, then it's no use testing it further. And except for ODF formats, because ODF formats, Microsoft Office is not the original producer for ODF formats. It's not really interesting to check those there first. Then they're converted. For now, they're converted to OXML format, the respective OXML format, and then at this point, they checked whether the conversion was successful. And in the end, the results are opened in Microsoft Office and see if can Microsoft Office open the result cleanly or not, which means the file is valid if it can be opened. Or mostly valid because Office accepts strange things, but we have to adapt to that. So this tool produces different outputs. One is structured results in the console. It kind of looks like what's on the right side. There's a CSV file which can be used for further processing. It also produces a list of failing files, both for files that failed conversion and both for files that failed opening after conversion. And there's also a list of files from the initial testing, which one succeeded and which one failed there. And that's basically static information. Then these results are published on that link that I showed previously after further processing. The result table looks like this. These are not the most recent results. It's just, I want to show the first columns. So these are technical, actually, the oldest results. And also it doesn't show, when we first started using this tool, that was about 2404.8 or 9. So these older results were after the fact. But it's still interesting to see those and see if there are older regressions there. It shows the versions, the total files tested. There's the conversion failed list. And in the first column, the blue numbers are clickable and they open up the list of files. And in the further columns, they show both the how many failed, but it also shows the increase and the decrease in the respective field. So it means that, for example, for between 2205 and 2305, there were 15 new conversion failures, but 10 conversion failures were now gone. Same for cases when it when it failed to open after conversion, and there's finally the number of files that succeeded opening. The major improvements to the tool is that I worked on improving the result list, both for what was shown on the console and both that was produced for processing. there are no Jenkins jobs to execute these tests. There have been some optimizations so that these tests run quicker. Some were more on the practical side, like we're using a container on the same network. And another improvement is that, as I mentioned, the initial list is static, so it means that they can be reused, and you don't have to start by checking whether Office can open the original file each time. And finally, another improvement was that both the conversion and testing of converted files can be parallelized by using concurrent queues. So you just fill those queues, and after each step and the other step consumes the elements from the queues. And the reports are now published. And we thank for Sendis for supporting this work. There were some other improvements that were also useful. So now it can also not only use the online convert to endpoint, it can also use the convert to command line interface with using desktop CollaborOffice or LibreOffice builds. These are all done in Windows because it's a C# program. You need Microsoft Office, so you need Windows builds for this. And the big importance here is that you can use there are ByBysec builds for LibreOffice and now for CollaborOffice as well. And the ByBysec means that you can use like a repository of binary builds and use binary search to find where a regression started if you know that there's a point where it fails to open and there was a point where it opened cleanly. So it's much easier to identify where the problem started instead of trying to figure out, okay, you have a version number, but where could it have started between two versions? It's a bit slower than using the cool endpoint though. Some other improvements is that it's also able to, it can also create PDFs for visual comparison. This is useful for the fidelity aspect, and it can be configured separately as a config file. Some ideas for future improvement is the reporting accuracy is, now there are some tricky situations because both the conversion and opening after conversion can time out, and that means that the results are not stable. Sometimes they're like off by 1 or 2, and it just creates a bit of annoyance trying to find out whether that's actual something that started failing or it got fixed, or it's just because of the flakiness. We could try converting to more formats. Currently, we only convert to OXML formats. One option would be to keep converting to the original formats, but in that case, it has to be a bit different for ODF files because there's no point in testing ODF files in Microsoft Office. But it can still be interesting because what if something goes wrong and we produce invalid ODF for whatever reason? Hopefully not, but that's why the tool exists. And another option could be to have a tool for auto bisecting, which would mean that you have a list of files that started failing between two versions, between two commits, and just using this tool, and this could be a script. The script would loop through the files and do a bisect, and you would finally just get a result with all the individual commits and the list of files that started failing at those particular commits, without any manual interaction. So I want to talk about some improvement. These are some individual improvements and fixes that were done in the couple of months in the past. One was related to converting XLS files to XLSX that contained unsupported functions. So XLS, the binary format, doesn't contain, since it hasn't been improved recently, it doesn't contain a lot of new features like functions that the newer, that OXML supports in newer Excels. And what Excel does is that saves the files with defined names that are to maintain compatibility. So it can be opened in an older version, and it will not complain. It will not work correctly, obviously, but it will not complain. And Calc used to save these. So in the XML, the defined name was empty, the XML element, and Excel didn't like that. So if we just add the hash mark, name, question mark, value to the element, then Excel opens these files cleanly. This is a very, very simple change. But maybe eventually we could think about dropping these names altogether, because it's probably not needed, but now it doesn't cause a problem anymore. And more than 2,000 sample files were affected by this change. And this change was this is not a regression. This has been there all since the beginnings, and it hasn't really been reported, so it seems like it haven't plagued users. And that was just one very vague bug report. And this got fixed in 24.4.12, thanks to Tomáš for fixing this bug. This other issue, this was related to saving numerical dates in numerical cache in x86 formats. In the buggy state, these charts that had these cached values were removed in Excel, and that was not great. And it turns out the problem was that in the XMLs, instead of the canonical representation of like integer representation of dates, formatted dates were saved. And Excel didn't like this. But this was not a regression, this was an implementation error when adding support for numerical cache. This affected about 400 samples and was fixed in 24.4.13. Another regression was related to slide layouts, and that went missing in PPTX formats. This was due to an effort to deduplicate the master slides in PPTX format. I think this is what Joe talked about yesterday. This was an older issue that was coming from previous versions. But in this case, what it turned out that for the bug docs, some layout XMLs were omitted, and about 500 test files were affected. Not PPTXs, interestingly, so it seems like other formats were more prone to this one. And what's good about this is that even though it was a regression that was introduced in this particular version in 24.4.11, it also got fixed in 24.4.11 in a hotfix. So that shows how useful this tool can be to identify issues quickly. And then finally, this is a cool only bug. So this did not occur with in desktop, which also meant that it couldn't be bisected or tracked in desktop. But in this case, the split panes that were only horizontal, only vertical, were saved incorrectly. And the XML had some bogus reference to panes that were not in there in the XML. Like, for example, bottom right, but only top left or top right was existed. And this happened because Collabor Online only supports frozen rows and columns, and split panes are handled in a bit of a special case. They're shown as fixed as frozen rows and columns, but are preserved in the during save. And this affected a couple dozen samples, and it was also fixed in a recent update. So the biggest improvements in terms of numbers, I'm not showing it here, but you can check in the website. In XLSX format, the 1,600 failures went down to about 800 in the past couple of months, and for XLS to XLSX conversion, about 16,000 failures went down to 2,600. So not all of them are this easy to fix. So there are probably a lot of ones that only have a couple of files, and that's going to be a lot of work. And we expect to continue working on this in future versions and future months and years. Thank you. Any questions?